I have not slept through the night since that run on I-35. Every time I close my eyes, I see headlights cutting through dark and a pale shape standing on the shoulder like it had been waiting for me. The cab still smells like stale coffee and leather, and my hands remember the cold of the metal steering wheel even when I am home. My name is Marcus Alvarez. I am 40 years old. I have hauled freight across Texas and beyond for 20 years. I was supposed to be good at reading roads, weather, and people. That night, none of that helped. It was 2:17 a.m., southbound, somewhere between Waco and Hillsboro, the sky a black sheet with no moon. The wind was thin and sharp, the highway sounded like a far-off train, and the radio had dropped into static before I saw her. I should have kept going. My chest tightened with the old reflex to help. My hands left the wheel, the cab cooled as if a door had been opened to winter, and I told myself I would only check. I am telling this because someone driving alone might make the same decision. Maybe hearing what happened will stop the next person from stepping onto the shoulder. I grew up in Laredo with a small yard and a mother who made meals like prayers. As a kid, I learned to identify trucks by their exhaust notes the way some boys can pick a song on the radio. My father worked construction and taught me to notice metal fatigue, to trust a rhythmic thrum underfoot. I left home at 18 with a CDL and a duffel bag. There were good years where the pay and the freedom matched, and nights when a diner coffee tasted like victory. There were also temperate nights of loneliness and a divorce that threaded through my life with a slow erosion. Linda called me from time to time after we separated. Our daughter Maria is 10 now and lives with her. I used to drive with a radio host and an old thermos, laughing into the dark. Then an accident took one of my closest friends, Hank, on a rainy stretch near Corpus. I remember the smell of coolant and the way his boots looked under the cab light. That changed me. After Hank, I started watching shoulders more closely, more suspicious of shapes that did not belong. I told myself that made me safer. I told myself compassion could be tempered with caution. Sensory memory kept me alive on the road. The taste of metal in my mouth when brakes scream. The brush of warm diesel on winter nights when engines rest. The scratch of gravel under tires at dawn. All of that backed up like a dam when I saw her under the sodium glow. The highway that night was a stripped artery of light and dark. The concrete felt brittle under the tires, and the road signs leaned like tired men. My headlights threw a cone of brightness that cut through fog patches and showed the shoulder in slices. The air smelled of cut grass and distant burnt rubber. I sensed the road hunger, the way asphalt seems to want attention when you are alone. I had been in the cab for hours. My eyelids hummed at the edges, but my mind was alert in the way muscle memory keeps you awake. There were farm fields on either side, black as soot, and fence posts that looked like teeth in the dark. The hum of the engine was a steady companion. At one point, a hawk moved across the light and vanished into the night like a swallowed thought. The GPS blinked, saying 30 miles to Hillsboro, and for reasons I could not explain, my peripheral vision snagged on a figure a few yards beyond the paved shoulder. It was small, like a child, but the clothes were wrong for anyone who would be standing there at that hour. The coat was too neat, too clean, the pattern not smudged by the wind, as if it had been stored and then placed on someone who had been waiting. My mouth dried. I switched off the CB mic and sat with the low throb of the dash lights. My heart ran a little faster, a small animal in cage rhythm. I calculated distances and time, measured the risk in seconds. When I pulled onto the shoulder, I kept the engine idling low, the cab light off, the door locked. The first thing I noticed up close was the eyes. They did not reflect my flashlight. They were flat and patient like river stones. I thought for a stupid second maybe she was blind. The second thing was the silence. No breathing that matched hers, no rustle of clothing, no scuff of gravel from someone shifting weight. The air smelled faintly of laundry soap and something older, like dust kept in a closed room. I cracked the window an inch and asked if she needed help. She did not answer at first. The night around us was full of insect buzz and distant truck lights. I remember the sound of my own voice, too loud, too human. When she finally spoke, it was layered, like a radio overlapped with whispering. She said my name. That was the thing that made my stomach drop through the floor. I had not given anyone my name. I had not left voicemail with my full name for months. Hank had joked once that you can always spot a trucker by the way they say their name, and hearing that syllable in the dark felt like a crooked mirror held up to me. We had a conversation there on the shoulder, but it was not a normal exchange. I will write it out, because the way it played felt like a negotiation of heartbeats and meaning. I rolled the window down a bit more and forced my voice into steady. I said, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" She turned her head slowly, so that the light caught one side of a face that did not move the way a human face does. Her lips made words without the small, involuntary things that make speech human. For every line she spoke, I gave an answer. I remember each line and the way my palms sweated on the steering wheel. She said my name. I said, "Who are you? How do you know my name?" She said, "I have been waiting." I said, "Waiting for what? Do you need a ride to the next town?" She said, "For company. For the stopping." I said, "There is a rest area up ahead. I can call 911. They can send someone." She said, "They always send someone when the ones inside do not listen." I said, "Listen to what? What do you mean?" She said nothing for a long time and then finally whispered, "Kindness." Each line came with small actions. I could feel my legs trembling, my throat tight. My hands kept a casual hold on the wheel so I could still move the truck if I needed. Her voice layered with others, like a chorus pressed into a single throat. At one point, I asked if she was hurt and whether I should open the door. She smiled, and that smile did not reach the eyes. The hair at the back of my neck stood up. I thought of Hank again, of how easy it was to want to help. I thought of Linda and Maria and the way Linda always said, "Do not stop for someone threatening." The tension was scraping my ribs thin. It was then that she stepped closer, not with the shuffle of a person, but with the smooth, impossible slide of something not needing to find purchase. The shoulder gravel did not crunch with her step. My radio hummed, and for an instant her voice seemed to be sung through the static. Her hands were clean and empty. I felt like a man at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to move forward or hold his ground. I want to take a moment here and ask you to do something small for me if this reaches you on a screen, and the thought of driving alone at night has crossed your mind. If you have a story like this, type the word road in the comments, followed by the state where it happened. If you were alone, write alone first. We are building a map of moments so patterns might be found. Your comment could be the link that helps someone else avoid what happened to me. I know that seems odd to ask in the middle of my confession. I know it sounds like a community plea. But when I later looked for patterns, the only help I found was from other drivers, who kept notes in the margins of forums. If you were with someone on the road that night and you saw something odd, share it. If you are skeptical, say so. This is for the people who pass through bleak stretches at 2 in the morning, and for the families of those who never came back. The reason I ask you to start with a single keyword is practical. Moderators use tags and filters on forums, and that simple structure helps research volunteers sort entries. I do not ask for personal details here. I ask for an anchor. Please leave your comment, and if you do not want to comment publicly, at least tell a friend what I am about to say. After I closed the window and tried to steady my breath, something inside me said, "Do not open the door." I could feel the raw temptation to lean out, to take her hand, to offer warmth against the night. My training as a trucker, the years of numbers and safety protocols, and the ghost of Hank told me to keep doors locked and call dispatch. I grabbed the phone and dialed for the highway patrol. The operator said an officer would be dispatched. I told them my mile marker and what I saw. The dispatcher was a woman with a calm voice who introduced herself as Joe Martinez. She told me to stay where I was and not to engage. I repeated the mile marker. I told myself that help was on the way and that if something happened, I could rev and go. The woman at the shoulder watched me and, when the radio voice explained that a patrol car would be coming, she said into the night, "They come for pieces." The words were like thrown pebbles. I felt heat in my cheeks. I thought of Maria asleep at her grandmother Diane's house. I thought of every time Linda had told me to be careful. The night closed in tighter. The hum of insect wings pressed like fabric against my ear. I kept my hands visible on the wheel so the officer would know I was compliant. The patrol arrived maybe 12 minutes later, though it felt like an hour. Their headlights cut a new valley of light into the shoulder, and the two officers stepped out with flashlights, their boots crunching the gravel. Sheriff Carter called out over the noise and introduced himself. He said, "You okay in there, trucker?" I answered him and explained what I had told the dispatcher. The first officer shone his light on the woman and frowned. The second officer, Deputy Ramos, kept a hand near his holster. They asked her to show identification. She tilted her head, and for a breath the light seemed to slide off her like oil. Her voice folded into their comms, and she whispered, "I am hungry." Then the situation did something I still cannot describe with ordinary words. When the patrol stepped forward to take her, their light refracted, as if hitting glass, and she moved like a reflection slipping out of alignment. The officers took a step back as if they had been startled by a stray animal. They radioed their supervisor and asked for a canine unit. One of them, Tom from dispatch was the name that came over the radio, said they were diverting to our location. The woman gave a low laugh that sounded like leaves scraping. The officers tried to communicate rationally, the way men in uniforms do, with commands and requests. She answered each with a phrase that sounded like a promise. At that moment, the dialogue between three humans and that voice became frantic and small. Sheriff Carter said, "Show us your hands." She said, "They reach." Deputy Ramos said, "Step away from the road now. You need to step back." She said, "You will walk into the dark willingly." Sheriff Carter said, "We can help you find shelter. You are trespassing on a highway." She said, "The highway pays for kindness with loss." Deputy Ramos said, "Are you hearing this, Marcus? Get back inside your cab now." I said, "I am here. I am staying put. Please be careful." She said, "I have been waiting for a long time. The sound of engines is like heart. I eat the stopping." That exchange was full of microactions. Carter's jaw tightened. Ramos swallowed audibly when the woman smiled. They tried to contain it with procedure, but the words unmoored something in me, like a boat losing its anchor. Everything escalated when Deputy Ramos moved toward her with a radio torch. The light was bright, and the woman flinched in a way that looked human. Then there was a smell like spoiled milk, and something heavy pressed against my chest, like memory or cold gravity. The canine unit arrived, but the dog whined and refused to step onto the shoulder. The handler apologized and said the dog would not respond, something he had never seen in his 12 years of service. I remember the officer named Ellis, who later wrote a short piece for the county paper, shaking his head when he told me the same story. The officers tried to detain the woman, and she let out a sound like pages tearing. One of the patrol lights went out suddenly, and then the radio filled with dissonant static. In the confusion, she stepped toward my truck in a slow, deliberate motion, and then all the small lights around us dimmed as if someone had drawn a curtain. I smelled rain, though the night was dry. Then a cold wind blew through the cab vents, and the engine died on its own. I had to kick the floor to get the glow of the dashboard back. The officers shouted, I shouted, the woman was gone. What followed was procedural and bureaucratic, and full of names I will never forget, because they took the whole event and stamped it into official paper. Sheriff Carter took my statement. Deputy Ramos walked the shoulder with a flashlight. Officer Ellis logged the time. A 911 audio recording record was made and filed under the County Incident Reporting System. There was a chain of custody form for evidence taken from the shoulder, the usual paperwork to make the scene legal. The police wrote a report and stamped it with a case number. Later, I would request that file and be given a redacted copy. The 911 call transcript reads like this in part. The dispatcher said over and over, "Unit en route, unit en route." The report included a note that a canine handler reported an unusual reaction in his animal. There was a separate internal memo about power disruptions at the time of the event. These documents had signatures and the official stationery that makes such things feel real. There was also an email from Tom, the dispatch supervisor, who asked officers to file any anomalies in a supplemental form. I kept each page. I scanned them. I uploaded them to a forum where other drivers collect odd incidents. The technical parts of the investigation mattered to me because I wanted something solid to anchor the unease, something that said real people had been there and recorded it. The police took a few soil samples from the shoulder and logged them into evidence with a chain of custody number that followed standard protocol. The text on the chain of custody form read as expected and provided reassurance that the moment was not only in my head. In the days after the shoulder, my life got tight and small. I stopped taking overnight loads. I called in sick to teams I'd been scheduled to run with. Hank's widow, Dana, called to check on me and told me to come by when I could. My sister Maria, who lives with our mother, left a voicemail that made me ache. Linda sent a short text that said, "Please be safe," with 3 prayer emojis. The local paper ran a small article by reporter Ellis asking about unusual sightings. A few strangers messaged me online with similar stories. There was a woman named Mrs. Farley from Hillsboro who said her cousin had disappeared from a county road 10 years ago. An older driver named Ray posted about a boy in a yellow jacket near a bridge on US 84. A volunteer group led by a woman called Diane started mapping anecdotes and plotted a cluster of occurrences along a stretch of interstate that included my incident. I contacted a guy named Joel who runs a forum for long-haul drivers, and he suggested I keep a log. I kept a small red notebook and wrote timestamps, weather, names of officers, and the odd things like radio static and the canine refusal. Each time I wrote, I could feel the immediate relief of doing something methodical. Doing paperwork steered panic into function. At the same time, I was losing sleep. The image of that smile and the way the eyes did not reflect stayed with me. There were moments when the memory felt like a physical pain. The first time I debated going back to the exact mile marker to look for traces I had not seen, I pictured the shoulder again and how the gravel looked smooth in a way it should not. The second time, when I dreamt of tiny feet running along the median and then dissolving into dust, I woke choking. I remember a moment of such intense anxiety that I could not even pick up my phone to call Linda. My hands shook when I tried to fill the tank, and the gas station attendant named Melissa asked if I was okay. I told her I was just tired, and she offered a cup of coffee. At night, I would sit in my porch light and watch our neighbor Diane walk her dog, telling myself the light was medicine. I thought about selling the truck, trading the freedom for a desk job. I thought about Maria and her laugh and how it used to bubble from her like small bells. The trauma braided itself into my work. I took shorter runs and avoided rural routes at night. Hank's name lived in the edges of every decision. There were 3 moments after that night that crystallized panic into action, and each one reshaped how I moved through the world. The first came 2 weeks later when a young driver I knew named Corey texted me a photo. He had stopped for a man in a hoodie near Goliad. The photo showed a shadow standing too still on an empty shoulder. I called Corey and we talked for nearly an hour. He told me he had gotten out and the person said, "Will you come closer?" He said he backed away and left. He sounded hollow. I felt responsible. The second happened when I was at the truck stop and a woman at the counter overheard me and said her aunt had been missing since 2009 and she had seen a figure on the highway camera near where her aunt vanished. Her name was Paula and she had a scarf with a frayed edge. We exchanged numbers. The third was when Tom from dispatch told me there had been a cluster of calls from drivers who reported being called by name on shoulders they had not yet reached. That message broke something inside me. Each of these moments felt like a pressure building that needed to be released, and in each there was a moral calculus of compassion versus survival. I started to gather more deliberate evidence. I drove the stretch of road in daylight and cached notes. I spoke to Sheriff Carter again. He was worn but candid. He said there was nothing in his past record to explain an apparition. Deputy Ramos admitted the dog had refused to approach and that several units had experienced odd interference with equipment the night we were at the shoulder. I filed a public records request. The county clerk sent me copies of radio logs and officer notes. There was an incident report from a year earlier where a motorist reported a woman walking on the median and later disappearing. The pattern made the hair on my arms stand up. I reached out to a small investigative journalist named Ellis, who had by then written 2 pieces about unexplained roadside disappearances. He suggested we look for commonalities in time of night, weather conditions, and vehicle type. He also connected me with a volunteer named Joel who tracked these things on a community map. Joel's group included men and women like me who spent nights on the road and compiled reports. They named the phenomenon in clipped, practical language and compared notes like technicians. I participated in conference calls where names like Diane, Paula, Corey, and Dana came up again and again. They were not famous names. They were human anchors. I spoke to a forensics tech named Brian who told me that some soil samples had unusual traces when analyzed, but the lab results were inconclusive. He was careful with language and suggested that equipment sometimes behaved oddly near certain stretches of roadway. There was a technical note that I believe is important to include for credibility. The 911 transcript shows a sequence of events with timestamps, unit IDs, and call signs. The evidence log lists 3 collected items with chain of custody numbers and signatures from the seizing officer and property clerk. The audio file contains a section of broadband static coinciding with the dispatch time, a detail logged in the supplemental report. I requested the raw waveform, and a brief forensic analysis was done which indicated a non-standard low-frequency modulation at the time of the event. The lab memo was cautious in its wording, stating that the modulation could be environmental but also could be an artifact of equipment interference. The process was standard, documented, and readable. Keeping these traces was a way of introducing process into a story that otherwise felt supernatural. As the weeks stretched, the consequences multiplied. I lost a regular contract because I would not take overnight hauls. My supervisor at the company, a man named Hankson, insisted my hesitation was costing the business. I tried to explain, but my explanation sounded like superstition to him. I spoke with Linda more about selling the rig. Maria came to a rest stop one afternoon and climbed into the cab. Her small hands were sticky with fries, and she asked why a man would stand alone in the dark. I did not have an answer. My therapist, Dr. Patel, suggested grounding exercises and mindfulness to manage panic. I tried medication for sleep. At night, I would wake and see the road in my head like a film negative. I would lie there thinking of kindness as bait. I started carrying a pepper spray can inside my truck, an object I had once viewed as unnecessary. I began to sleep with the porch light on, as if light kept small predators at bay. Friends like Dana and Ray called regularly. Joel messaged updates about similar clusters. The work felt like an impossible juggling act. I was both a witness and a man losing the ability to be alone. One evening, 3 months after the initial incident, I took a drive with a camera mounted on the dashboard. I wanted to see if I could capture anything. The air felt thick with the kind of pressure that makes the skin prickle. I stopped at the same mile marker during golden hour and set the camera to record. I sat in the cab and listened to the hum. The camera caught small things like an errant cloud and the shimmer of heat on asphalt. At one point, the footage recorded an audio spike of low-frequency noise that matched the lab's earlier observation. Later, when I played the recording back, the video frame where I had seen the figure showed a smudge that seemed to pull itself into shape and then unravel like thread. I sent the footage to Ellis and Joel. They shared it with a small online community. Reactions split between skepticism and intense concern. Some people pointed out camera artifacts and lens issues. Others said the time-stamped waveform matched low-frequency anomalies reported elsewhere. The mixture of responses left me more unsettled. It also established something, that the event was not only my memory, but had a physical trace that others could look at and argue over. I have 3 distinct tension memories that I return to like wounds. The first is the instant the patrol lights went out and the cab lights dimmed. That was 523 characters of pure terror if I counted it properly in memory. The second is the way the dog refused to move toward the shoulder, the handler's face collapsing into confusion. The third is the moment she smiled at me while the officers tried to take her and said, "I eat the stopping." Each of these moments felt like the world made a choice, and I watched the choice happen. They were brief, but they rewired me. I still hear the sound of that smile sometimes. Those moments forced me to prioritize staying alive over the old reflex of giving help. 1 month later, the community map had 3 more pins added, and an article in a regional paper by reporter Ellis called attention to a dozen similar calls over 5 years. The sheriff's office issued a general statement saying they were investigating reports and advising motorists to remain in vehicles and call authorities. Sheriff Carter met with residents at a town hall and said he had no explanation but that officers would respond when called. There were interviews with drivers like Ray, who described a silhouette on a foggy shoulder, and with Dana, who recalled a missing friend. The dialogue in public spaces shifted from rumor to cautious official vocabulary. I attended one meeting and listened as people named feelings aloud: fear, confusion, helplessness. A small volunteer group organized night runs where several drivers would travel in convoy so no one would be alone. I joined 2 of these runs. We parked 10 cabs at rest stops and swapped stories. Some drivers refused to stop for anyone on the shoulder after hearing the tales. Others said they would not abandon someone who needed help. The group held a fragile truce with fear. 3 months after the night on I-35, I had changed in ways that are small and large. I slept more with lights on and less with friends. I sold some of my route contracts and picked up more daytime work. My daughter Maria started asking questions about my eyes and why they often looked tired. Linda suggested I come home for a while and offered to let me stay in a guest room. I thought about that every single day. The community forum that Joel ran had become a resource. There were maps and timestamps and a thin roster of people who documented anomalies. We were doing citizen science in the margins. My name appeared in one article and then in a small radio segment. Calls came from curious listeners and also from worried families. I began to speak publicly about staying in vehicles and calling dispatch and not stepping out alone into the night. I said the words over and over until they felt like a script I could use to protect others. The compassion I had once seen as a virtue changed into a measured caution. I still hated it in myself. I still bristled at the shriveling of impulse to help. But I also understood that not every act of kindness in a place like that ends the way you imagine. 6 months later, things had settled differently than I expected. The cluster maps had not disappeared, and there were still reports, but there had been no single decisive breakthrough. Sheriff Carter's office continued to log calls. The lab results remained inconclusive. Joel's community added a new strand of mapping that included camera artifacts and canine behavior notes. I took a job driving routes that kept me closer to home. Maria came to visit more often. Linda and I shared dinners where we talked about mundane things like oil changes and whether the ficus needed pruning. The way I slept changed slightly. I could perhaps doze for an hour or 2 without waking to an image of eyes in the dark. But I remained alert in a new shape. A person who had been given a lesson by the road itself. I still drive sometimes at night when work demands it, but I am not the same reckless helper I once was. The woman on the shoulder had taken something from me I cannot explain. She had also given me a clarity about survival that I might not have found otherwise. I am telling you this because the moral of the story is not that you must harden, It is that you must be deliberate. If you are driving and you see someone on the shoulder at night, lock your doors, call 911, give your location, and stay in the cab with lights on. If you can, get the attention of an official with an assigned badge and wait. If you must stop, stay in view of others and avoid walking into isolated dark. Teach your loved ones these steps. Keep a log and take pictures from a distance. Share what you see with community groups and with law enforcement. Kindness is essential to being human, but on deserted stretches of highway, there are things that turn compassion into bait. We do not have a full explanation for what we saw. The investigations have given me papers and quotes and a map socketed with pins, but they have not given a tidy answer. I continue to sleep badly. I continue to carry pepper spray. I still think of the woman and her layered voice when small movements happen at night. I survive, and that is its own complicated victory. If you made it this far and you want to help map these risks, please leave a comment starting with the word road and the state where it happened. If you are alone, type alone first. Your single line can be the first piece of a chain that helps someone else. If you want to contact me privately and share details, you can find the thread Joel maintains and send what you can. I will keep updating this account if new information appears. Be careful out there. The highway is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Sometimes saving a life is as simple as calling for help. Other times, it will require that you let the night keep its secrets so you can keep the people who need you most. Survival is not shameful. It is practical. And if you ever think compassion means stepping into a shadow alone, remember my voice telling you to pause and to count the cost. I am a truck driver in Texas. This was the scariest night of my life. If anything I have said helps even one person think twice before opening their door on a lonely road, then I have done something worth the insomnia.